Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Facebook Live today. We are so excited for another fantastic session that we have lined up for you. So welcome to all of our viewers from all over the world. I see everybody putting in their locations and weather, and it's just fantastic to see where everyone is joining from. We have Margie, who says it's sunny in Massachusetts, and let's see, we have Anne from Kentucky, and Dean from Croatia, Delaire from New York, Nancy also from New York, Sharon from Wisconsin. Just it seems like I'm reading a lot of American states here, but actually it's users from all over, and it's just incredible to see you all joining us. So thank you so much, everyone from near and from far, for tuning in today. And we hope that whatever the weather is, you're excited to learn a little bit about genealogy and family history. That's what we come to teach here at these Facebook Lives. So we're so excited to bring this content to you. If you're new to our Facebook Lives at MyHeritage, we have many sessions that we've done already that you can access on the MyHeritage Facebook page, facebook.com/MyHeritage, under the video section. And if you look there under the video section, you'll see a whole list of Facebook Lives that we've done, many from 2020, and we've already gotten started in 2021. We have many, many more lined up for you for the rest of this month and for the coming year. So really, really exciting things, all about new features, DNA, genealogy, from different experts and genealogists in the field, as well as from MyHeritage employees who have worked on all these fantastic products that we're bringing to you. So we hope that in addition to checking out today's session, you look back at our previous Facebook Lives. Today's Facebook Live will also be taped, and you can access it later at the same place. That's on the Facebook page, on the MyHeritage Facebook page, facebook.com/MyHeritage, under the videos section. So now that we have that covered, we can get into today's show. We'll be offering a MyHeritage Complete Plan to one lucky winner today. So all that you have to do to enter, just comment in the comment section. Tell us about a discovery or a breakthrough that you've made through MyHeritage. It could be a photo that you found, or something that you discovered in a photo when you colorized or enhanced it on MyHeritage. Just put that in the comment section, and you'll be entered in today's draw. And we'll be giving away one MyHeritage Complete Plan. That's the best plan we have to offer at MyHeritage. Unlimited access to 13 billion historical records, as well as free and unlimited access to the MyHeritage Photo Enhancer and MyHeritage in Color. Those are our famous photo tools, unlimited family tree size, in addition to many, many other features. So a fantastic plan up for the taking today. So leave a comment, tell us about your breakthrough, your discovery, a photo that you found, a record. Let us know what you found using MyHeritage, and you could be our lucky winner today. So today we have with us Andy Likins, and he is a genealogist that's been fascinated by family history for as long as he can remember. He's been actively researching his family history for over 35 years. He's published articles, taught on topics relating to American and Scandinavian research, and he has also performed research for PBS's Finding Your Roots. He's a professor at Pikes Peak Community College in Colorado Springs, and collecting images of family members is one of his favorite facets of family history. So we are so thrilled to have him with us today, joining us. Let's see if we can get him on the screen here. Hello, Andy.
Hi, everyone. Good to see you all today.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Glad to be here.
We're so excited, and I know that finding family photos, it can just be such a treasure if you can get your hands on them.
That's right. That's what we'll talk about here today. So looking forward to it.
We're so excited. So do you want to tell everyone just a little bit more about what you'll be speaking about?
Yeah, so, well, when you're doing genealogy, I think we've all experienced this. Sometimes it just becomes a list of names and dates and places, and it can be a little dry. And I mean, for genealogists, we get excited about those things, but when sharing with others, sharing with our children or friends, sometimes, their eyes glaze over a little bit. If there's not a little more interest to it. So, ways we can do that is finding out stories about family members. If we can put them in historical context, that's fantastic. But for me, the gold standard is if you can find an image of an ancestor, they come to life when you know what they looked like. And so that's what I'll be talking about today, how we can find these, and some ways that I've done that in my research.
Fantastic, fantastic. What a treat. So do you want to share your screen and I'll get that up there?
Yeah, we do that.
Okay, great. There we go.
That look good?
Yes, perfect.
All right, great. All right, so starting out here, this is a photo of my great-great-grandfather. His name was Thomas Likins, and he served out of Iowa for the Union in the Civil War. And this is a tintype gem photo. So it's about the size of your thumbnail. And this is something that my grandmother had. And when I was a teenager, she gave this to me. And to me, it was just so fascinating that I had this photo of this person who had lived such a long time ago. And at that point, we knew almost nothing about him except his name and just a few details. But of course, that's been fleshed out, and I'm going to share more about him as I talk about my pursuit for images of ancestors. But yeah, so that was very exciting for me. And as Esther said, I've been interested in family histories as long as I can remember. In second grade, we had to do a family tree, and I remember just thinking that was interesting. And as I grew up, I liked hearing the stories about the past from my grandmother, and my grandmother's aunt was living. She lived to be 101, and so I would ask her questions. And I even went to Norway as an exchange student for a summer because I just wanted to be close to where my family had come from. And so that gives you a little bit about the idea of interest that I have. And there are many reasons that we want to find photos, just to know what they look like. But it's interesting to see how traits get passed down in families also. And let's see. There we go. So it's interesting now to see how traits have been passed down through the generations. And this is a photo of my daughter, Kaya, who's 25 now. And when she was born, one of the very first things that we noticed was that she had a cleft chin. And my wife and I don't have cleft chins. Our parents don't. Our grandparents don't. So eventually I went back looking through the family photos that we had and found a photo of my great-grandmother, who is from Norway. And you can see just a little bit there. She did have a cleft chin. And then on my wife's side of the family, she actually had a Norwegian great-grandfather who had a cleft chin. And so those traits, they skipped quite a few generations, but it was fun to see how they'd been passed down. So yeah, as I said, when I was a teenager, I started just trying to find as many photos as I could. And so I was able to find photos of my grandparents. So there's me and my parents and my grandparents. And I knew 3 of my grandparents, so that wasn't too difficult to find. And then by rummaging around a bit, looking through some old boxes and basements and under stairs and such, I was able to find images of all of my great-grandparents also. So then I wanted to see if I could find images of all my great-great-grandparents. And so that took a little bit more time, but mostly through contacting cousins of my grandparents and people like that. Eventually, I was able to find images of all of my great-great-grandparents also. And of course, I wouldn't want to stop there if I didn't have to. So at this point, I have images of half of my third great-grandparents, and I have a few images that go beyond that. And I call this presentation Finding Images because we get to the point where there was no photography, and so we have to find other types of images such as paintings or sketches or silhouettes or even sculptures. And so just a tiny bit of history of photography. The first photo was taken in 1839. And the first couple decades of photography, these were the daguerreotypes and the ambrotypes. And they were kind of expensive and they would set you back a bit. And so not everyone probably would have their photo taken. You'd have to have a bit of money to do that. But by around 1860 or so, and so my knowledge would be mostly about the United States, and so it might be different in different parts of the world. I know we have lots of people watching from lots of places. But around the time that the American Civil War started was when tintypes and some early paper photos, which such as the carte de visite, were becoming available. And you could buy those for a few cents. And so it was making it available to just about anyone. So my theory is that for most people who lived after 1860, at least in the United States, in other places where photography was being used, probably they had their photo taken. Now, it has to have survived if we're going to have it today. So, you know, there were fires and there were floods and people would throw things away, and, you know, we all know that happens. Another thing, were they labeled or not? And I'm sure we all have photos that we wish someone had taken 5 seconds to put a label on the back to let us know who the person was. So those are things that we're up against. And so, of course, we're not going to be able to find photos of everyone. But my goal has been to try to find them wherever I can. All right. And I just love all old photos. So this is focusing on photos of my direct line ancestors, but I love all kinds of photos. And so I like to find photos of the collateral relatives. If I can find a photo of their home, pets, that's my grandfather and his dog. I have a photo where it was labeled that the horse's name was Old Lee, so that's pretty cool. Businesses that people had. And when we get into the early 1900s, it's when the general public could afford to buy a camera and they could operate it. You didn't have to be a professional photographer. And so, for example, one of my great-grandfathers had a camera, and so we have lots of snapshots that he took. And I love the snapshots. I love the portrait photos where it's so formal and they're wearing their best clothes and they're often, you know, very serious. But I really love the snapshots too, which give you more of a feel for the personality of the people. And this is one that is of my grandfather, and this is the grandfather that I didn't know. And he and a buddy are dressed as women, and this is from a series of photos where they're at college and they're climbing in a dormitory window dressed like this, and in the end they get apprehended by some college administration. And so it gives me some sort of a sense of who my grandfather was, because I never got to meet him. So as I was searching, as I mentioned, I started looking around the house, and with all things with genealogy, we want to start at home and with our immediate relatives and just see what we have. And so just by searching through my grandparents' basement, this is a photo of my great-great-grandparents for their wedding. A third great-grandmother with some of her grandchildren. And this is a nice family portrait from my wife's side of the family. And so you just want to dig into those boxes, the ones that are stashed away that you want to get to someday. But so that's where you want to start looking. Then your next step is to try to contact some other family members. And I have something of an advantage in collecting these images for the reason that my family's fairly small. So I just have one cousin, and both of my parents had no cousins at all. And so a lot of things have funneled down to me. And so I've had to go further out to find other photos, such as my grandparents' cousins and their descendants. And so one of my strategies has been to connect with distant cousins that I haven't been in contact with for a while. And it's good that people know that you are the one who cares about the family history. So they know that, you're the genealogy person. And so they should contact you if they have questions about the family, and they just keep you in mind that way. So an example of this, about 30 years ago, my dad and I were driving through South Dakota, and we stopped to see a cousin. It was my dad's second cousin, who he hadn't seen since he was a child. And so we got together with him, and we shared some family information that we'd found along the way. And this gentleman was married, but he had no children of his own. And he said, well, I think I have some photos and, some things in boxes somewhere, but he could not find them. And so I'm like, well, okay. So then about 15 years later, he contacts me, he sends me a card in the mail, and he said, I'm moving to a retirement facility and I came across some old boxes of stuff. Do you want them? And so I wasn't sure what that might include, but I said, sure, I'll take them. And so he sent me 2 boxes, and inside were 2 of these big old family Bibles, some old albums, just covered with mold. But anyway, so I start going through this stuff. One of the Bibles and some of the pictures belong to another line of his family that I'm not related to. So I did contact them and I got those to them. But inside the Bible were just some real treasures. And one of the things was this photo of my third great grandfather, who also served for the Union out of Iowa during the Civil War. And I had seen a copy of this photo before, but I'd never had an original of it. And he was taken prisoner in Mississippi and was never heard from again. So it was just a real treasure to have this. It included a letter that he'd written to his family during the war. It included some other photos of family that I'd never seen before, and thankfully, quite a few of them are labeled. So that was one of those examples where this guy just knew that I was the one who was interested in the family history, and so he contacted me. Another example that my grandmother had a cousin who lived to be 100. She lived in Washington, D.C. And my mother was making a visit out to see her. And so I asked her if she would ask this cousin, Jeanette, if she had some photos and if she had some copies could be made. And so she did that, and I got a copy of this photo, and this was a real treasure to me because this is a photo of my fourth great grandmother, and she was born in 1786. So it was a real treasure just to have a copy of this. Now, again, this cousin, she was married but didn't have children of her own. And her stepson, a few years ago after she had passed away, he contacted me and he said he was going through her things and he didn't know of anyone else in the family who would be interested in these things. And so he sent me this and some other real wonderful old photos. And so again, it was a case that he knew I had some interest, and so he contacted me. And I'm just afraid otherwise, these things might have gone to Goodwill or been tossed or something. So I do want people to know that I'm interested. Another example, this one still boggles my mind. I wrote to a second cousin of my father's about 15 years ago. Now, that first photo that I showed you of my great-great-grandfather who died in the Civil War, he was killed at the age of 22. Thankfully, he got married when he was 18, and he had 2 sons by the time he was killed. And so, of course, I'm descended from one son, and on the other line of the family, there were 5 children, and then just 2 grandchildren, and then there were no descendants beyond that on that line of the family. And so I contacted this second cousin from that line of the family, and I always, when I write to people, I always say, I'm more than happy to share anything I have with you. Can you fill out a few charts, and do you happen to know of old photos or anything that I could get copies of? And so she filled out the charts and sent them back to me, but she said, I don't know of any photos or anything. So, well, I tried. So then, about 5 years ago, I got a phone call out of the blue, and this second cousin of my father's had passed away. And a cousin from her mother's side of the family that I'm not related to in any way was taking care of her belongings. And he had come across that letter that I had written to this woman. And so I was the only person that he knew of on her father's side of the family who might be interested in anything. And so he said, I have some boxes of things. Should I send them to you? Some photos and things? And well, since she didn't say she had anything, I wasn't quite sure what that would be. I wasn't sure if I was committing to getting, 60 years of her vacation photos or something like that. But I said, yes, please send them, and I'll pay you for the postage. And so I didn't hear anything for about another year. And then he called me again. He said, okay, I have the things together now. I'm going to send them to you. So he sends them to me. And I could not believe what was in these boxes. There were things that I had no idea that they would even exist. And so one of the things was this photo of Thomas Likins and his wife. And I had another photo of her, so I could recognize that that's who they were, but never a photo of them together. And because they both had very short lives, it's just amazing that these photos exist even. Excuse me. And amongst the things also, just some real treasures of photos. This is a photo of my great-great aunt who was a mail carrier in Iowa And it's just a very rare type of photo to have a woman at a profession like this, doing her job from that time period. So that's really cool. And just some other nice photos. But amongst these were 15 letters that Thomas had written to his wife, Margaret, during the last 3 months of his life before he was killed at Atlanta. And so Thomas went from being someone that we had one photo of but knew almost nothing about him to being one of the great-great-grandparents that I know the most about, because now I know his personality from his letters, and it was such a treasure. In one of the letters, he mentions that he was so happy to hear that my great-grandfather, his son, had been born and was healthy. So he never got to meet him, but he said he's so happy that that redheaded boy is doing well. And my great-grandfather was a redhead, as was my grandfather and my father too. So just those little details that are just wonderful. And it was all because I'd written to this second cousin once, and she happened to hang on to that letter, and someone found it years later. So you never know what seeds you might be planting. So I try to think who might have family photos that I could contact and get copies of the photos from them. Now, I have some lines in my family where the family had 10 kids, and then each of those families had about 8 or 10 kids, and there's so many descendants, it's really hard to know where things would have ended up. But I have some others that are kind of like mine, where it's kind of, maybe there was an only child, and so things have kind of funneled down that way. So I look at the different lines in my family and try to find descendants of these lines. And you just can use all kinds of different sources, obituaries, online directories, Facebook. So an example of this, my third great grandparents from Norway, they both died in the early 1900s, but I didn't have any photos of them. And so I thought, well, they lived long enough that there should be some photos out there somewhere. And so I knew of a line of the family where I actually met people from that line years ago when I was younger. And one of the people had a name that was kind of unusual, like there wouldn't be a lot of people with that name. And so I went on Facebook, and sure enough, I found that they were on Facebook. And so I sent them a message, and I explained who I was. And I said, I have family history information I'd love to share with you if you're interested. And do you happen to have any information on the family or photos? And so this cousin wrote back to me, and she seemed glad to hear from me. And she said, well, I think I have some photos. And she started looking around a little bit. Excuse me. And so after looking around, she sent me a copy, a scan of this photo. And sure enough, these are my third great grandparents with 4 of their 5 children. Now, you'll notice that the one daughter is holding a photo in her hand. So that's a photo of the oldest son of that family, and that's the one that I'm descended from. So now this cousin, she looked around some more, and then she said, oh, I have another version of this same photo. And so take a look at this. So it's the same photo, but it's been colorized, but also notice the oldest son has been photoshopped into the photo. So this is like 1880s style photoshopping. And here, let me go back again so you can see. So there's the original, and then there he's been photoshopped in. So so this has a great story. This is my Norwegian family before they left Norway, and probably a photo that they had taken maybe to leave copies with family in Norway. But the thing is, the oldest son had already come to the United States by that time. And so he couldn't be in the photo. And so they added him to the photo. And then the next year, they were all reunited in the United States. So I'm just so glad to have a scan of this photo because it's just a real treasure. Another example, I contacted a cousin. I found an obituary and tracked down one of the descendants, and it was on my mom's Murphy line of the family. And she sent me this photo that I'd never seen before. And these are the 5 Murphy sisters, and one of those is my great-great-grandmother. And so it's great to have this photo. And then if you zoom in on it, the names of each sister are written across their blouses, which is not my favorite way to label a photo, but it's better than no label at all. And the one of my great-great-grandmother, hers was labeled Aunt Duck. So apparently she went by the name Aunt Duck. And I had no idea of that before, and I'd love to know the story that goes with that. And then also she's wearing a pocket watch, and this is one that my mother still has today. So that was a real treasure to find that. And this cousin just thanked me for contacting her because it prompted her to go through the old boxes and look and just see what she has, because a lot of people don't know what they have. And this kind of forced her to look at things, and she was glad to get these things out and see what she had and get things labeled. And I shared pictures with her. And so, sometimes people just need a little prompting to dig through a little bit and see what they have. And I know we all have unidentified photos. So these are some photos of folks that were in my grandparents' basement that were not labeled. They're all tintypes, and tintypes often aren't labeled because they're hard to write on, and so people didn't. But as I contacted other cousins and compared photos, this was a picture from a cousin that helped me identify the ones above, and they were photos that were taken on the same day. It's actually their wedding picture. And then another one of the Murphy family, and again, another version of the same photo, but it helped me identify the one that I had. So don't throw away photos if they're not identified. You never know, you might get them identified someday. So there are just so many websites out there these days. And of course, MyHeritage is one of those where you can post a family tree and attach photos to it. And there are lots of others, RootsWeb. I use Facebook, Find a Grave, Dead Fred, Ancient Faces. There are so many out there. I can't list them all, but just look and see what's out there, and check and see if there might be photos of your people. An example of that is Dead Fred, which is a website where you can post photos of, it could be like a photo you have of someone who's not in your family and you want to find a home for that photo, or you can post photos of people and try to connect with other descendants. So I did that. I posted a photo of my great-grandmother's cousins, and they had kind of an unusual name, Barham, which I thought, well, if there's any Barhams, they're going to find this if they're researching the family. And sure enough, it took like 5 years or so, but I was contacted by a Barham descendant. And so this is a photo that I received from this cousin, and we exchanged a lot of information after connecting. On Find a Grave, people, of course, usually are posting images of the grave markers, but sometimes they'll post people also. And this is an example of a photo of a family member from that. And then on RootsWeb, which was message boards, they're not really in use these days, but they were a great way to connect with people back about 10, 15 years ago. And so I posted a query on there for the part of Norway where my family's from, and just said, is anyone else researching this family that lived in this parish on this farm? And again, I didn't hear anything for a few years, but then I got an email out of the blue from a guy in Denmark, and I was surprised it was from Denmark, but later learned that one branch of the family moved from Norway to Denmark. And we started exchanging information. And so this is a photo that I had, and this is a picture of my great-great-great-grandfather sitting there. And then we didn't know who the other three people were. And he was identified by my great-great aunt, who would have been his granddaughter. And so I thought, well, if this aunt can't identify the other people in the photo, certainly there's no one else who could identify these people. Well, this cousin had a copy of that exact same photo. And so between us, we were able to figure out who everyone was and realized that it was a reunion of siblings of the family. And he had some other great photos. The interesting thing is he had photos of my family that were taken in the United States that we don't the descendants in the United States don't have, but they would have their photos taken and then send them back to Norway or to Denmark. And so the copies exist there, but they're not in the United States. So this is another photo that I'd never seen before, fantastic one, of my third great grandparents. And then he also shared with me a scan of this photo, which is my fourth great grandparents. So people that I never thought I'd have photos of. So you just never know what's out there. So Facebook is a place where you can connect with people to try to find different groups where you might connect with other descendants and that type of thing. So some examples of that. There are family pages out there. For example, with my own family, I've set up one that's called Woodburn Family, and my grandmother was a Woodburn, and so this is for descendants of my grandmother's grandparents. And so what I can do on there is I can post family information and post photos and try to generate interest so that people want to exchange information and dig through their boxes and find their photos and scan them and share them on there. So and it'll go for a few months where nothing gets posted, and then all of a sudden there'll be a bunch of activity. And so that's one thing that I've done. On my wife's family, she's descended from the Stein family. They have something similar. So you can always set these groups up yourself. And what you might want to do is make it a private group so that you don't have everyone in the world on there. But that's a great way to exchange things. Another example with that is there's a plate that has been passed down on my line of the family. And so I posted a picture of that plate because we knew that it had come from the Woodburn family. And I think we found 5, 6, 7 other people who had a copy, who had one of the plates from that set. And so for some of them, they didn't know what it was and that it was from the Woodburn family. And so then they could label it and say what it was. But we figured out that it came from my third great grandparents and from about 1880s. So just good ways to connect with people. The other sites I have listed here, these are just random ones that I belong to, and there's no standardization on Facebook of what the different pages are going to be. So you just have to search out there. So I have a lot of family from Colfax, Indiana, and so there's one, the Colfax Historical Society. So I follow that. One for a part of Norway my wife's family comes from. I have family from Redfield, Iowa, Greene County, Ohio. The Forgotten Iowa Historical Society is a fascinating place where people just post interesting things about Iowa history. My ancestors are from Värmland, Sweden, and so those are just names of different groups that I follow, just in case someone posts something, and then every once in a while I'll post something on these. Some other ones, the Civil War Photo Sleuth is a great site, and there's a website that goes with that. If you have American Civil War ancestry, be sure to check that out. Again, I have lots of Norwegian, so a Norwegian genealogy, eBay genealogy, Swedish portraits. These are places where you can find just amazing things with a bit of luck. So if you find that there's not a group that meets your needs, try to set up your own group and share it with others. So just recently from the Woodburn family site, a cousin shared this photo with me. These are my third great grandparents with their children. I had never seen this photo before and did not have a good photo of my third great grandmother before this. And this is one from my wife's Stein family that was posted on the site. So just any ways that you can connect and generate interest and get people looking through what they have and finding things. So one thing to be aware of, though, we always want to be thinking critically when we're doing genealogical research. You know, we've all seen family trees online where we think, oh, they didn't check this out, and this doesn't make any sense, and you always want to check sources and all that type of thing. Well, it's the same with photos. You always want to think critically. When someone says this is a photo of so and so, think, does that make sense or not? So this is an example of that. I was contacted by a cousin a few years back, and they sent me a scan of this photo, and they said, these are our fourth great grandparents. And, it's a beautiful photo, but I had to write back to them and I said, there's no way that's our fourth great grandparents, and had to tell them why. So whenever you find a new photo, someone shares something with you, you want to think, what's the history or the provenance of the photo? Who identified it? So this photo had been identified a long time ago by my great-grandmother's cousin, but she didn't live long enough ago that she would know what my fourth great-grandparents looked like. So think about that. And is the identification plausible based on the probable age of the photo? So my fourth great-grandparents, they would have been born, in the later 1700s, and they both died by 1860. And by the time this type of photo was becoming available, which was about 1860, they would have been in their 70s and 80s. And this couple is not in their 70s and 80s. So you also want to think about things like the type of photography, the clothing styles, how their hair is done. Maureen Taylor has wonderful stuff on this, on how to identify photos, figuring out the age of the photo based on all these different criteria. So you want to think about that. So I determined these are not my fourth great-grandparents, though it's a wonderful photo. So, and then of course, whenever you get photos, be sure to label them so future generations will know what the photo is, and also like what's the line that it's come down on. Did it belong to your grandparents? How did you get it? So that they know something of that history. All right, another place to search is on eBay. And you can set up ongoing searches on eBay. And I've done this with my own surname. My surname is pretty unusual. So if someone else has the surname Likins, they are probably related to me at some point. And so I've set up this search. So whenever something comes up on eBay with the name Likins in it, I get an email about that. Now, most of the time, it's nothing I'm interested in. Fine, delete. Another way you can do this is like a place that you have family that lived in. Like, I have lots of people from Colfax, Indiana. So I've set up a search for Colfax, Indiana. So I look at the emails I get and see, am I interested in this or not? Now, 99.9% of the time, it doesn't pay off, but every once in a while, it does. And so several years ago, I got an email that there were some Likins photos that were posted. And so I took a look at them, and all these photos were posted, and they were all labeled, they're in great condition, but they weren't actually my line of the family. And so I'd recently come in contact with someone who is descended from that line of the family. And I contacted him and I said, John, you have to check these out. And so he did, and he bought them immediately. And, you know, they're such wonderful photos. I'm so glad they found a good home. So this is something that you can do, set up an ongoing search on eBay. Now, if your name is Smith, you probably don't want to do that because you're going to get way too much stuff. But this works for unusual surnames or small towns, things like that. Now, you can also just do searches on Google. And these are some images I've come up with of family members just by Google searches. So that's something else to keep in mind. Now, lots of things are being digitized these days. And so libraries often have photo collections. You can find newspapers, yearbooks, county histories, all kinds of histories. And so these are examples of ones that I've found. This is from an obituary. This is from a county history. This is from a county atlas. So this shows the land that my family lived on and their home. So you just need to look out there and see what types of histories there are for the places that your people came from, and these can be sources for you also. Now, as I mentioned, so many things are being digitized, and there's so many databases, and unfortunately, there isn't a lot of standardization to this, and sometimes it's local, like it might be a historical society. Sometimes it's a genealogical society. Sometimes it's the library. Sometimes, you know, all states have some sort of archives to them. Then there's the national archives. It could be topical archives for different ethnic groups. So you just need to kind of search and see what fits with your family. And these are some examples. This is a photo of a distant cousin of mine through the National Archives. This is a quilt that a relative made that's in the Smithsonian. This is just a photo of a town in Colorado where I had some family living. And even if your people aren't in the photo, just to see what the place looked like when your family lived there is wonderful. So this is a mining town up in the mountains, and you know, you can see it's all muddy and smoky, and just gives you a feel for that place at that time. All right, and then sometimes we have ancestors who are photographed for some other reasons, like this. So now this is actually my wife's family. This is my wife's great-grandfather, and just by searching on Google, I found him listed in a listing through the Colorado State Archives. And I had no idea that he'd even lived in Colorado. And so I contacted the archives and was able to get his mugshots. And so it turns out during Prohibition, he had a still and ended up in the Colorado State prison system. And he got out early when Prohibition ended. But so that's a photo that we have of him. Now, doing further research, he lived in Nebraska before that, and I found in a newspaper record that that wasn't his first run-in with the law, and this was him as a younger man. And through the Nebraska State Archives and their prison system, and this time he was guilty of highway robbery and ended up in prison for a few years. He actually shot at the person that he was robbing, and thankfully didn't kill that person, or probably my wife never would have been born, because he would have spent the rest of his life in prison most likely. But anyway, you never know. So just search around, and the state archives have some wonderful things. All right, so going back a little bit further, as I mentioned, sometimes we get beyond the age of photography. And so early in my search, I had come across something on my 5th great grandmother. So her name is Ann Carter. And in a history of Quakers in Northern Virginia from 1934, I found this. I have a portrait of Anne, wife of James Carter. It's painted in the costume of the Friends, or the Quakers, and then it had this inscription on the back. And so I knew in 1934 this painting still existed, and so I wanted to see if I could find it. And I searched around. I contacted historical societies. I contacted genealogical societies. I put posts online with queries, and nothing. I couldn't find anything. But it so happened around 2000 or so, the family that owned this painting actually donated it to the Virginia Historical Society. And so by just continuing to search in their database, it appeared. And so this is what I found. So this is Ann Carter, and this is a painting of her that it's what we would call a primitive. It was, not the Mona Lisa or anything, but still gives you a feel for what she looked like. And it might have just been like a traveling painter or something like that. But it was just great to finally find this. The interesting thing is, that was not the only portrait that existed of this family. And so in addition, there were paintings of her son and daughter-in-law, and that is my line of the family. And then there were a couple grandchildren also who are not of my line, but it was just a real treat to find paintings of all these people. So another similar situation, my 5th great-grandfather, Leonard Eckstein, he had a very interesting history. He was born in Bavaria. He got in trouble for sharing too freely about his religious beliefs and ended up in a jail. And he escaped from that jail and then came to Pennsylvania in the 1760s. And so he got married here, and he had 7 daughters. And it turns out that one of his grandsons was the founder of Case Western Reserve University in Ohio. And so through doing some ongoing research, I found a mention that there was a sketch that was done of him. And so I contacted the university archives, and they shared this with me. So this is my 5th great-grandfather, Leonard Eckstein. I was so thrilled to get this. I just thought this was the coolest ever. And of course, my wife says, "Oh, well, he looks like he was a hobbit." So anyway, I thought it was great. So through further research, I found mentions about his brother, Johannes, and it said Johannes was an artist in the court of Frederick the Great of Prussia. And I thought, oh, that might just be an embellished family story or something like that. But through further research, I found out that it was true. And these are some additional pieces that relate to this family. So Johannes and his wife and some other relatives from that family. So it was very cool to find all those things. Well, there was also another mention, and that was that in the late 1700s, a sculpture had been done of Leonard Eckstein's father, and it was done by another brother in the family, and he lived in London. And so through searching around for a while, I found out that this sculpture still exists. It's only about 6 or 8 inches tall, but it's actually in the United States now. It's in the Yale Center for British Art. And so this is that sculpture. So this is my 6th great-grandfather, Conrad Eckstein. And so I just love this. It's so cool to see someone who lived such a long time ago, who's my ancestor, and just how he's dressed and everything. It's just really fun. So that's the furthest back that I have gone in my research. So just some things, some nice photo tools. MyHeritage has some great things that they've come out with in the last year or so. And they have the photo enhancer tool, which I've enjoyed using that. And with some photos, you just get some very dramatic results. And so this is a photo I shared with you earlier of my 3rd great-grandfather, George Knoll. And there's the before and there's the after. And as it processes this, it takes maybe 10 seconds or something like that. But that photo is so much clearer through using the enhancer. So that's fun. Another one is the photo colorizer. And, I have to say, I love the black and white photos. I love the sepia tone and everything. And, that's probably my preference. But with some photos, colorizing them really does bring things to life. And especially, I think the outdoor photos are really wonderful. And this is an example of that. So this is my great-grandfather's sister, and she was an early driver in her county in Indiana, and that's the family car. And I think it does make the photo come to life, having that color added. And interesting things pop up in colorized photos that you don't notice originally. And so, of course, there's the woman on the swing, but then also behind the car, there's another woman who has her hands behind her head facing the other direction. And I never even noticed that before in the photo until it got colorized. So it can bring out new things. Another thing about colorizing is when I show photos to my children, they respond so much more if there's color in the photo. And so, of course, like I say, I love the old type photos, but I notice that people respond to it differently. It's like, oh, these are real people. They're not gray. They actually had flesh tone and they look like they're alive. And so, we do want to make our genealogy accessible to others and interesting to others. And so I have a wall in our house that is just covered with old photos. And with some of them, I have colorized them and had them printed up. And I noticed that sometimes people connect more with those photos. And so that's kind of fun. So I do have an Instagram page if you're interested in following me. I post randomly. Sometimes I'll post every week, sometimes I don't. But what I try to do is take photos that have my ancestors in them, and then tell a little story that goes with it. So what is happening in the photo? Why is it significant? What was their relationship? What's a fun story that goes with that person? What's an interesting fact I've learned? And you can't write too much on Instagram, it's fairly limited. So but this has been fun to share with people, and I get interesting feedback on it. So that's an idea. A couple years ago, I followed genealogist Amy Johnson Crow. Has a program that she developed called 52 Ancestors. And with that, she posts a different prompt every week, like oldest or winter or harvest, or just different words. What you have to do is think of something that you can write about that prompt. And so I would try to find a photo that went with the prompt and then write something. It just kind of forced me to produce something, because as genealogists we're often collecting and collecting and collecting, but we're not always producing something that is accessible to other people who maybe don't have our same level of interest. So we want to get other people, show other people, this is cool, this is interesting, these are fascinating people who are like us in lots of ways. And so what I would do then is use the prompt, make a posting on Instagram, and write about that picture. And it forced me to produce things. And so my goal is to actually put those writings and pictures into a book form. I have a lot of projects going, but that's one of them. So Amy Johnson Crow, her page on Facebook is called Generations Cafe, and you might want to check that out if you have an interest in that. So my Instagram page is called Glimpses of the Past. So here we go. So these are all the photos that I have of my ancestors, my direct line ancestors at this point. And I think I have about 55. And I keep searching. And of course, I also search on my wife's family also. But I hope I've encouraged you to keep searching. There are lots of these photos that I never would have guessed existed. I never would have guessed that these images were around at all. And it's by connecting with other family members, it's deepened my connection with them. Often they've shared that they've appreciated that I've encouraged them to look through the boxes and dig things out and label things. And so, it's all about relationship. And so, so this is a little bit of my story, and I hope it encourages you to keep looking, and I wish you lots of luck as you continue your search.
Thank you, Andy. So insightful. And we have a bunch of questions that have come in that we'll ask you now.
All right.
So there's a question here from Susie, and she says, "Thank you. There are some great ideas of how to get photos of family. What do you suggest we do to get photos from family that are not yet digitized? I've emailed everyone asking them to gather old photos, and I will pick them up so they don't even have to mail them, but I haven't had success yet. Do you have any tips for her?"
Yeah, so there's different things you can do. You can, it depends on where they are. If they're close to you, if they're anywhere in your area, go visit them. If they feel comfortable with it, if they could send them to you, and then you could digitize them and then send them back to them is an idea. I've done road trips where I go and visit people, and then take a portable scanner and scan that way. So yeah, I know and some people, that the technology barrier is too much to get over to scan them themselves, or maybe they have another family member who could scan them, or if nothing else, people are getting better with, just with their smartphones. If nothing else, if they could just take a photo with their smartphone, and there are some apps for scanning photos and things like that that you can look at, and if they can just take a picture and then send it to you, that's another way. So yeah, I guess you just have to find out what works for that person.
Okay, great. Let's see. Karen says, Andy, this was amazing. Thank you. Such good leads for us. My Norwegian maternal line comes from, oh, sorry, I cannot pronounce this city, but I think it's the same area as yours. And she says, wonder if your wife's family and mine connect. So maybe you could message afterwards and see if you're
okay. Yeah, could be.
Okay, Sheila asks, which portable scanner would you recommend?
Oh, so I have the Flip Pal scanner, but I think they're not producing them any longer, if I recall right. Which it's one where it's about this big. So that's what I've used, but I think they've stopped producing them. So I'm not sure. You might just have to Google and see. But like I said, another option is apps that you can use your smartphone to take the picture. Those are good. If you can do it on a flatbed scanner, I find better results because then it's going to be focused well and the light's going to be even and everything. But anyway, that's what I use, but I'm not sure what's out there today because I bought mine a number of years ago.
Okay. Don asks, and he says it's 50 degrees in Tennessee, where he is. What digital format should you save your photos in? JPEG, TIFF? What do you suggest?
Okay, yeah, so TIFF is the best. TIFF takes a lot of space, but if you have a scanner that will do TIFF, that's the best, and then you can convert it to JPEG from that. JPEG, you do lose a little bit of detail with it. It's not a lot, for our purposes usually, and but TIFFs can be very large files and more difficult to send. But yeah, TIFF is the best, and then JPEG would be my next recommendation after that.
Marsha asks, I recently found an 1880-ish photo of a lovely woman with a name on the back who I've not found in the family, but apparently came from a neighboring farm. What is the best way to share it with someone? No idea who. Who might really want a copy?
Yeah, oh, that's great. And that's wonderful that you want to share it. So one site that I mentioned, deadfred.com. So it's deadfred.com. That's a place where you can post orphan photos and hopefully find a descendant that you can then give it to. Also, just local historical societies are sometimes interested. So you could see if you could send it to like that county's historical society or a library or something like that there. There are also sites on Facebook for orphaned photos and heirlooms that need a home and that type of thing. That's something you can look at. I can't think of exact names off the top of my head right now, but there are groups like that where people are just dedicated to finding homes for old photos, Bibles, and things like that.
Okay, we'll just take one last question before we go to our giveaway. And this question is from Carita, and she asks, what method do you use to label your photos?
Okay, yeah, so it depends on the photo. If it's a paper photo, I try to use pencil but very lightly. You don't want to press through it. Yeah, so you generally don't want to use ink, anything that's going to bleed through, or if it got wet, that would bleed. Yeah, so that's probably the best for paper photos. It gets a little more complicated if you have tin types, or if you have cased images, which are like the daguerreotypes and the ambrotypes, because you probably need to put in like a piece of paper that goes with it. But yeah, so that's what I do. And then I also put photos in archival sleeves, which I recommend. So after the photo's labeled on the back, then I can put it in the sleeve. So then whenever I'm handling it, it's protected from the oil on my hands. And then I have archival boxes too that I put those in so that everything's protected. But yeah, so that's generally what I would recommend, but you just want to be very careful that you're maybe, writing in the corner so you're not damaging the photo at all if it's a thin paper photo or something like that.
Fantastic. And I see just so many comments about how much inspiration you've given to all of our viewers to now go out and locate more of their own family photos, bark up every tree and go to all the relatives. And
yeah, just try everything.
Such great ideas. And I just love that story about leaving the letter with the relative, that you never know once you plant the seeds, what'll come from it.
Yeah, and it takes patience because that took years and years before I got any results, and I never thought I would get any results from it. So it just takes patience.
Fantastic. So good luck to everybody looking for your own family photos, and we hope that this has helped you and given you some ideas for you to go and find some of your own photos. And now we're going to give away a MyHeritage Complete plan to one lucky winner. This is the best plan that we have to offer at MyHeritage, with complete access to 13 billion historical records, unlimited access to our photo tools that Andy showed before. That's MyHeritage in Color, the MyHeritage Photo Enhancer, as well as unlimited family tree size and many other additional benefits. So a really fantastic plan. And thank you to everyone who wrote comments in the comment section and entered, and your lovely stories were just so great to see. And the winner of today's complete plan is Helen Schultz. And Helen wrote us, I'm so excited. I discovered by finding a census that my great-great-great-great-grandmother worked in the household of Buckingham Palace at the turn of the 19th century. The head of the household was none other than Queen Victoria and her beloved Albert. So what a find, Really incredible, Helen. Thank you for sharing that with us. And congratulations on the MyHeritage Complete plan. We'll be in touch with you through private message to claim your prize. Thank you everyone else for joining us. And Andy, thank you so much for sharing everything that you've learned about your family photos. And really, it's just been such an inspiration for all of us to take it forward with our own photos. And I learned so much, and everyone in the audience, I'm sure, did as well. So thank you again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And thank you everyone for joining us. We hope that you have a great rest of your day. Bye.